Hello everyone, welcome back to Tech Tactics. Today we're taking a look at the GT 1030, NVIDIA's ultra budget GPU from way back in 2017. But here's the twist, we're pairing it with some serious firepower, an Intel Core i9-13900K, 64GB of blazing fast RAM, and it's all running on the Asus TUF Gaming Z790 plus Wi-Fi motherboard. So, can the GT 1030 rise to the occasion, or has the time finally passed? Let's dive in and find out if this old school card can still throw a punch with modern hardware backing it up. The online marketplace for CD keys and software. G2A.com, where you can find discounts on all the keys you need. This is Crime Scene Cleaner, but before we jump into the gameplay, let's quickly talk about the specs. The GT 1030 is based on NVIDIA's Pascal architecture. Built on a 14nm processor, it features a base clock of 1228 MHz and a boost clock of 1468 MHz. You get 16 ROPs, 2GB of GDDR5 memory, paired with a 64-bit memory bus, giving us a bandwidth of 48.6 gigabits per second. It runs on PCIe 3.0x4 and originally launched for $79, which is about £60 here in the UK. Now back to the game. I just picked this one up and honestly I'm really enjoying it. It's not quite an episode of CSI, but it's got its own quirky charm, I'd say. Running at 1080p was a no-go. Frame rates were hovering around 20 FPS. Basically unplayable, so I dropped the resolution down to 720p to give the GT 1030 a fair shot. On the low preset, the card actually held up surprisingly well. Sure, it looked a little blurry, but gameplay averaged around 70 FPS, with 1% lows at 27 and 0.1% lows at 24 FPS. There was quite a few dips here and there, but overall it ran smooth enough to enjoy. For a budget card, the GT 1030 still holds its ground in this one. Kind of. Next up is Borderlands 2, and this time I cranked the settings up to high and FXAA is enabled, which stands for Approximate Anti-Aliasing. It's a post-processing technique that smooths out jagged edges in a game's rendered image, reducing visual artifacts called jaggies. That reminds me of something else. Anyway, the GT 1030 actually handled it pretty well, averaging around 55 FPS. Now, keep in mind, the game dropped 5 years before the GT 1030 even existed. So yeah, I hope it gets close to 60 FPS. The 1% lows were around 42 FPS, and the 0.1% lows hit 34. Not perfect, but definitely playable. Overall, the GT 1030 gives you a decent experience in Borderlands 2. Next we have Fortnite, running at 1080p on low settings with FXAA enabled and motion blur disabled. This is the kind of game the GT 1030 manages quite well. While it's certainly not a modern performance beast, the card still holds its own in lighter gaming scenarios, especially with popular esports titles like Fortnite, Valorant, League of Legends and Counter-Strike. As long as you're okay with dialing down the graphics, the experience should be okay. It averages around 59 FPS and with 1% lows at 39 FPS and 0.1% lows at 30 FPS. Next up is Grand Theft Auto San Andreas Definitive Edition, tested at 1080p with all the settings turned down to their respective lowest levels. FXAA was enabled and motion blur was disabled. It's worth noting that the GT 1030 comes in two variants, one with 2GB of VRAM and another with 4GB. For this test I used the more common 2GB model. The GT 1030 holds up decently, averaging around 46 FPS, with 1% lows dipping to 24 FPS and 0.1% lows dipping to about 20 FPS. However, performance starts to crumble with newer titles, especially at 1080p. Take Crime Scene Cleaner for example, it was nearly unplayable at that resolution. Dropping to 720p helped somewhat, but in 2025, gaming at that resolution feels like peering through a foggy window. You'll find yourself squinting and second-guessing every shadow and movement. This is one of those games where lowering the resolution is necessary just to get a smoother experience, as 1080p performance really struggles. Overall, the GT 1030 2GB remains a decent entry-level card for retro or lightweight gaming, but don't expect miracles when it comes to modern, demanding titles or higher resolutions. Red Dead Redemption is the final game on our list, and surprisingly it runs pretty well on the GT 1030 at 1080p with the low graphics preset, FXAA enabled and motion blur disabled. You're looking at an average of 77 FPS. The 1% lows dip to around 59 FPS and the 0.1% lows fall to about 51 FPS. Not bad at all. One of the GT 1030's biggest strengths is its power efficiency. It draws just about 30 watts, making it ideal for low power builds or older systems. If you're into older or less demanding games, it can still offer a decent experience. But let's be honest, this card is seriously out of its depth with modern titles. With just 2GB of VRAM, it's hitting a hard limit in 2025, especially now that 8GB is quickly becoming the bare minimum. You'll have to turn settings all the way down just to get a playable frame rate in newer games. Oh yeah, and that's if they actually play the games. So, is the GT 1030 still worth it in 2025? Honestly, I'd say no. If anyone is out there has a valid reason for picking up this card in 2025, let me know in the comments, because it's officially time to retire this GPU. At best, it might have a place in a compact, ultra-budget build, but even then, there are far better low-profile entry-level options available today from a wide range of manufacturers. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe for more tech stuff. I'm David James, this is Tech Tactics, and I'll see you in the next one.
I reckon I'll sit here a while trying to figure this out. I'm gonna be rich.